Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are discussing the basics of Islam for the people who are interested in this religion or the people who are new and they need to know their basics. We are covering prayer, and before we can actually talk about the prayer itself, we have to talk about the prerequisites of prayer. And so the first condition or prerequisite is purification, which we have just gone over in our last lesson. And now we're going to do the second prerequisite, which is the prayer times. So in addition to having your body and your clothes and your place of prayer clean, you also need to have the proper prayer time. The time needs to be in before you can pray the prayer. So, for those of us who don't know, there are five obligatory prayers that we have to perform every day, right? And there are actually specific times for each of these five prayers. These times are actually ranges in which you can pray each prayer. So before the time starts, you cannot pray that prayer. And once the time is over, you've basically missed that time and you will have to make that prayer up. So what are these times? Well, let's look at the names of the prayers and their times. So the first prayer typically that we look at is, well, I should also tell you before that, that these times they depend on the position of the sun in the sky during the day. Depending on where the sky, I mean, sorry, where the sun is in the sky, that's what determines the start and end of each time. So now let's look at the different types of prayers, not the types of prayers, but the different prayers themselves, I should say, and their respective times. So the first one is Fajr. And Fajr is our dawn prayer, right? That's typically the first one when you get up in the morning. That's what you're going to pray. Now, the time for Fajr, it starts at true dawn and it ends at sunrise. So what's true dawn? Well, we don't necessarily notice it now, but before the days of rampant lighting and light pollution, we would see vertical rays that the sun was before the sun rose. And then those vertical rays would disappear. That's called false dawn. And then what would happen is the light from the sun would cause horizontal rays of light that are parallel to the horizon before the sun rises. That is true dawn. So true dawn is when the rays of the sun appear horizontally in the sky before the sun actually rises. So this is when those rays start to come out, that's when the Fajr time starts. And you've got until the actual sun rising to pray that prayer. The next prayer is our afternoon prayer. That's called Ẓuhr, okay, or Dhuhr if you want to be very specific about your pronunciation. Now, that prayer, it starts after midday. So that means that, there's always that point during the day where the sun is straight up in the sky. And objects typically don't have shadows, right? This is like, noon or high noon. Once the sun starts declining towards the west, that is when the afternoon prayer starts. And the time range extends all the way to the point where the sun is in such a position in the sky. At this point, it's declined far to the west now. It's declined so far to the west that when the light of the sun casts shadows of objects, those shadows are double the length of their object. So the sun has to be fairly west in the sky. And that's when the time of Ẓuhr is going to end. And the next prayer time is going to start. That prayer is ʿAṣr. ʿAṣr starts when the shadows of objects are double their length. And that prayer time range continues until nautical sunset. So there's sunset and then there's nautical sunset. Sunset is, that's the thing that we like to see on the beach. You can see the sun, it's declining into the sky, into the horizon. And, it's like reaching that halfway point. The sun is like halfway sticking out of the horizon. That's what we call regular sunset. That's not when Aszr time finishes. Aszr time finishes at nautical sunset, and nautical sunset is when the sun completely sets beneath the horizon. Once the disk of the sun has completely descended, okay, beneath the horizon, that is when Aszr time ends and the next time begins. And the next time is for Maghrib. Maghrib is our evening prayer. And Maghrib starts right at nautical sunset and it continues until the disappearance of astronomical twilight. So there are different types of twilights in the sky. There is like the regular twilight. That's when like, the sun set, but the sky is still kind of reddish. And then, the reddishness goes away as time goes on. And then what happens is there's like a whiteness in the sky. Once the whiteness in the sky disappears, this whiteness of the sky, that is astronomical twilight. And once that astronomical twilight disappears, that's when the Maghrib time ends and the next prayer time starts. And this is our final obligatory prayer. That prayer is ʿIshā. That's our night prayer. And the range for this prayer is arguably the longest because it starts from the disappearance of the twilight, of the nautical twilight, all the way to the start of Fajr. So you have all the way until true dawn to pray this prayer. And these were the 5 prayer times. Now, as we explain this, as a modern Muslim person, perhaps you don't see many Muslim people looking out and seeing, well, what position is the sun in so that I can determine when it's time to pray. Well, typically in Muslim countries, there's the call to prayer, which we're going to learn about soon, eventually. So nobody really pays that much attention because, well, there's always the prayer call. Every time a new prayer time starts, there's the call to prayer. And so we know, okay, it's time to go and pray. But another reason that you don't really see a whole lot of people looking out at the sun is because of prayer timing charts. So that's something that's important for us to talk about because when we are alone and we don't have access to a masjid or a mosque and or we're not able to go and pray, well, then we're going to need to determine the time for ourselves, right? So let's do a little note on timing charts. You know, timing charts are not that new. Spherical trigonometry and logarithmic tables, these were all developed in the 17th century. That was a long time ago. It was before it was before the American Revolution. So it was like, it was pretty much during I mean, it was a little after, of course, the Renaissance period, but it was during the time where, colonial exploration and all that stuff was happening. So in the 17th century, this is when logarithmic tables were all charted out. And using spherical trigonometry, we are able to use these values to determine the exact timing of each prayer. It's accurate down to the second for every prayer at any coordinate set on Earth. So wherever you are, you know your coordinates, and you know what you need to calculate the prayer times, you can calculate your prayer times down to the second. And what do you need? Well, you need logarithmic tables. You'll need your coordinates. You'll need, basically like information that you can find on the almanac, nautical times, etc. You can use all of these things, and you can calculate the prayer times down to the second. And because these are, verifiable and they've been tested, again, this is from the 17th century. So, many of our Olamar scholars have tested these things out exhaustively. And so because of that, we know that it's a reliable method of calculation. And Muslim can rely on prayer charts to determine the prayer times. And it's usually based on these calculations that you will see the timings every day on whatever, Muslim prayer app that you might be using on your phone or whatever. However, there's an extra little thing that we need to know, which is we need to pay careful attention to the method of calculation because the calculated timings will differ depending on the method used. So this is something that you know, not necessarily required. Again, if we know, the position of the sun, and it's not hard to go outside and look, especially if it's on a sunny day, then it should not be hard for us to determine the prayer times at all. However, if we do want to use the charts, so we need to know something a little bit more. But that's something that we can learn at another stage. And here is where our discussion on prayer times ends, and we'll start the discussion on the next prerequisite during the next lesson.